There is a law of unintended consequences. One example is, in this Wikipedia article, is about the gully erosion in Australia that's been caused by the rabbits that they brought in as game animals. When man tries to improve on nature, a lot of times he causes other problems that he didn't foresee. Another example is the Green Revolution in the 1980s, where they brought in some dwarf wheat and rice that made it a lot easier to thresh and process. And these new varieties of wheat and rice required a lot more chemical fertilizers to produce these high yields because these seeds were just different than the traditional varieties. This new type of wheat also produced a lot more gluten that started showing up in our bread, and the gluten created gluten sensitivity, dermatitis, and other types of allergies. I know in my own family, I had several of my sons that had skin rashes that went away when we got off gluten. One of my boys, he was very aggressive, and he lost his aggressiveness. When he got off gluten, he wasn't nearly as distressed. And I've lost a lot of weight since I got off gluten. And the Wikipedia article will tell you that the reason there's more gluten in our bread now is because of these new types of wheat that have a higher amount of gluten in them. So this new wheat is what's causing the problem. So our family went back to einkorn wheat, which is some of the oldest wheat in the world. It's been around for like 10,000 years. And it has a much lower gluten content. And we use some other grains that don't have gluten at all. And that resolved our problems. So we had to go back to something that was pristine to get around this new man-made problem of gluten. Likewise, I believe that the Barbados black-belly sheep and the St. Croix sheep are the only two sheep breeds left that are actually pristine, that they go all the way back and they haven't really been altered by man in a negative way. The original sheep breed is the Mouflon. If you look at it closely, you notice the colorings are a lot like the Barbados black-belly sheep. This is the wild sheep that man first domesticated, so it's the most pristine form of sheep there is. The first improvement man ever made was to find sheep that would grow wool instead of hair, because wool was necessary for keeping you warm. And so wool sheep were produced everywhere except West Africa, which is where the St. Croix and Barbados black-belly sheep originated, because wool is unnecessary there. All wool sheep produce lanolin. Lanolin is a waterproofing grease that helps the sheep shed water from their coats. Otherwise, whenever it rained, it would pull them down. But they produce a lot of lanolin. And the unintended consequence of raising sheep for wool is now their meat doesn't taste nearly as good as a hair sheep because they have all this lanolin that makes the meat taste greasy. The Grassroots Farmers Co-op explains this problem pretty well. Wool sheep produce a wax called lanolin, but the lanolin also has a really foul odor to it. And so most people who eat this find out that it affects the taste of the meat. But the hair sheep do not make lanolin, so their meat is much milder in flavor. This is why hair sheep taste so much better than wool sheep. But out of all the hair sheep, the St. Croix comes in first place. Why? On the St. Croix Hair Sheep International Registry website, they reference a scientific study that shows that St. Croix sheep have gone through taste tests back in 2004, and it's been published in scientific articles that they actually taste better than other types of sheep. Here's the article itself, and the results show that pure St. Croix sire and dam produce meat that tastes better than even like a Dorper or any type of wool sheep. It comes in first place if it's not mixed with any other sheep breed. So why is it? Why does the St. Croix taste better than the Dorper, which is also another hair sheep? I believe it's because the Dorper has been mixed with wool sheep breeds to give it the size that it produces. All of these sheep breeds, these hair sheep breeds, including the white Dorper, the Katahdin, the Royal White, they've all been mixed in their lineage somewhere with wool sheep breeds. The only two sheep breeds that appear to be pristine are the Barbados black-belly and the St. Croix, and that could be why they taste better. But the number one way you can destroy a sheep breed is by crossing it with another breed when you really don't know what you're doing. You're not going to improve a breed by mixing it with another one. You may destroy the unique characteristics of the breed that you already have. Another mistake breeders make is by trying to grow bigger sheep. Bigger sheep are not always better. The Grassroots Farmers Co-op explains it this way. The wool sheep breeds are usually larger and more muscular, while the hair sheep have a smaller frame and a more gentle musculature, and that keeps their meat more tender. Smaller animals are much more tender and produce better meat. There's a mutation in the genetic structure of sheep called the Calipig mutation. Here it is with Rambouillet sheep carcasses. You can see the one on the right is much larger because of this Calipig mutation. The Calipig mutation makes the back legs of the sheep and the back hindquarters grow much larger. You can see sheep number A and C, although they're different breeds, a Rambouillet and a Hampshire, they're much bigger than the ones that don't have the Calipig mutation. So that would make them more valuable, except when agricultural scientists started looking at this Calipig mutation and started describing it, and these people all have degrees or associated with large universities, well, they found out that the Calipig muscles in the back hindquarters of the sheep were much less tender than a normal carcass. When they did something called a Warner-Braxler shear force test, they found out that the meat was anywhere from 50% up to 1.5 times more tough than regular sheep meat. And the larger Calipig meat just didn't taste as good. When they looked at the juiciness or the tenderness or the flavor of the leg and the loin and the shoulder, they saw that it was a negative. This was not an improvement to sheep to growing bigger. It was a detriment. The other way that growing larger sheep destroys the sheep breed is it affects the feed conversion ratio. That is, larger sheep have a harder time converting grass or grain into meat. When you breed a sheep for larger size, it makes it much less efficient at converting the grass into sheep meat. And so really you're hurting yourself. This chart shows that poultry are very efficient at converting feed into meat. For every 1.5 pounds you give them, you get back 1 pound. Sheep range anywhere from 4 to 6 pounds of feed to produce 1 pound of meat, while cattle, it takes 12 pounds to produce 1 pound. So the larger the animal is, the less efficient it is at converting the feed into something usable like meat. So this idea of growing the biggest sheep in the world, that would be better, you're really raising much more tougher meat. You're also much less efficient. And so really you're just creating a monster sheep that's not going to help anybody. And that's how you destroy a sheep breed. Just breed it bigger and bigger each year. The other way to destroy a sheep breed is by using dewormers. I've never once dewormed my sheep in the 16 years I've had them. And so all those bad genetics are gone. But when you deworm your sheep, you're letting sheep that should not live reproduce inside your flock. You should find some other way or find sheep that are good for your area. If you've got a lot of worms, find a parasitic resistant sheep breed. But when you deworm your sheep and do that and let them breed, then your flock's always going to have to be dewormed. So that destroys the breed. Another way to destroy a sheep breed is by using all these medications on your sheep instead of letting the sick ones fall out or get culled. The other day I had a lady come by and they were looking at buying some sheep from me, and one of my sheep, it had lost a lot of the hair on its back. And so out of compassion for it, sure, I covered it with Vaseline because I didn't want it to suffer. But if it doesn't get better within a week, I'm going to put it in the freezer. I'm going to process that animal because I don't want to have to deal with trying to treat it from now on. But also, I want the genetics of any animal that's sick out of my flock. People who let these sick animals reproduce and don't cull them are really just creating more of a problem. They're destroying the breed by letting the animals that shouldn't live remain in the flock and reproduce. Another way to destroy a breed is by vaccinating your sheep. First of all, this puts vaccines into somebody else's food, which is absolutely horrible because there's all kinds of preservatives in these vaccines, and they should never be used. But also, it lets the animals that are sick and can't live without these vaccines, it lets them stay inside your flock and reproduce. They need to be culled. They don't need to be vaccinated. Any animal that cannot make it without vaccines, it needs to be culled immediately. There is no reason to ever use a vaccine on sheep. This is a big lie that Big Pharma has told us, that we need to vaccinate our sheep. And the reason they have to vaccinate sheep is because they feed them grain, which causes enterotoxemia. If they just grass feed them and not dock their tails, they wouldn't ever have to vaccinate these sheep for Clostridium or for tetanus, either one. So vaccines are totally unnecessary, but also if you've got a sheep that has to have vaccines to live, you're letting that reproduce in your flock and you're destroying the breed. Another way to destroy the breed is by using lambing pens. Any mother that cannot bond with her own offspring out in the open, that needs to be culled. That's a bad trait. But when you put them together in a lambing pen and make sure that all of them are productive, then the mothers that don't have the right genetic DNA for raising their own sheep on their own, that can't seem to bond or don't have good mothering instincts, they're going to pass that on to the rest of your herd. Now, I know you get more production out of lambing pens, but in the long term, you're really hurting the breed. Another way sheep breeds are destroyed is by feeding them grain, because you're going to make the sheep bigger and fatter, and the ones that do the best on grain, that's the ones you're going to try and breed more of because they're doing so well. Where you're getting rid of the trait of a sheep being able to live on just grass alone. Really, you should be selecting the sheep that do the best on just nothing but grass, because that is so much cheaper and so much healthier for them. So feeding them grain long term is not a good idea. The Grassroots Farmers Co-op makes a really good point here. The hair sheep breeds have a really efficient digestive system, which makes their meat high in protein and low in fat. This is especially true of 100% grass-fed sheep. And grass-fed lamb is an excellent source of amino acids and a variety of vitamins and minerals. Grass-fed lamb is much more healthy for you, and you have to consider that when they feed grain to these sheep, that it may not be organic grain. It may be pellets. It could be anything that's in that feed, and that feed is what you're going to be eating yourself. If you want to improve your sheep, raise them entirely on grass, and then keep the healthiest ones and let them reproduce. And that improves the sheep breed. You raise them on grain, you're really hurting the sheep breed. Likewise, any sheep that needs assistance in lambing is a natural process. If a sheep has to have human assistance in lambing every time it gives birth, then all your sheep are going to need help with pulling lambs out of them. And that needs to stop. Any sheep that needs to be assisted in lambing to give birth, they need to be culled. You cull that out of your herd, and you'll never have to do it again. I've never once assisted my sheep with lambing. Nature would cull these sheep that need help lambing. Why can't we? Well, they want to make more money, don't they? That's what it all comes down to. And hoof trimming is a complete waste of time. Any sheep that needs its hoofs trimmed, it's got to be culled. They never had their hoofs trimmed in the wild, and this is a brand new practice that shepherds do now, and it's time consuming. And if they've got a problem with their hoofs, it's because you're feeding them too much grain, honestly. But any sheep that has problems with its hooves need to be culled so it doesn't pass its bad genetics on to the next generation. Another mistake is to select your breeding rams, based on their scrotum size. I mean, this has nothing to do with their ability to reproduce. It may look like they're able to, but what if the ram has no real desire to reproduce? Like, he's just not interested. He's got some other problem, but you've selected him based on what you can measure and not on how he actually performs. In nature, rams have to fight for the right to reproduce, which makes certain that only the best and strongest rams with the strongest desires to reproduce will ever do that. This is how nature handles the problem and how mankind messes it up. But the number one way to destroy a sheep breed is through inbreeding. There are sheep breeders who retain their rams for up to 10 years, and rebreed this same ram with as many ewes as they can, trying to improve their breed. No ram should be kept more than 2 years, as keeping these rams for a long period of time is what causes inbreeding. The ewes are not the problem, it's the rams. In humans, when humans are inbred like the Habsburgs that ruled Austria, it causes epilepsy, insanity, and early death. King George III, during the American Revolution, was so inbred that he would talk incessantly until foam came out of his mouth. They had to restrain him physically to keep him from hurting other people. King Charles of England is also inbred. His mother and father share common ancestors, and he is morally depraved, as is his brother, Prince Andrew, who has been caught in all these scandals. So your traits are the first thing to go when you're inbred. Likewise, inbred sheep will lose their traits of flocking instinct, being a good mother, finding their lambs when they give birth to them, not just walking off, not being so stupid they can't find their own lambs. It's the traits. Even though the sheep might look bigger, it might sell better at the sale barn, they're destroying the traits through inbreeding. Losing their traits they need to survive, like being a good mother, these natural traits, when they're lost, that's a sign of inbreeding. So how do you cull these inbred sheep that have lost their traits? Well, it's really pretty simple. You stop deworming them. You stop medicating them. You definitely stop vaccinating them. You don't trim their hooves. You don't feed them any grain. And you don't use any lambing pens. That is, you return the sheep to their natural environment. And any sheep that cannot make its own way in a natural environment, it needs to be culled. And nature will do that for you if you don't do it yourself. Well, I hope you enjoyed the video. Thanks.